There have been 25 years of UN climate conferences, and COP26 is around the corner. What are your expectations, and what results do you want to see this time?
Well, look, the number one word is ambition. We're not where we need to be. About 120 countries have put in new commitments to 2030. About 70 of those are improvements, but we are not going to get under current plans to where we need to get to, which is a halving of greenhouse gases by 2030. So it's great that more than 100 heads of state are coming. They need to raise their game.
So in terms of the global strategy for climate action, it sounds like you think we're not meeting the moment.
No, look, we're doing better than we've ever done before. Those of us that were in Paris in 2015 would not have imagined that more than 60 countries, including the United States, including Europe, have committed to go to net zero by the middle of the century. It includes China as well. That's like more than 60% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. So that's good. Long-term goals are good. Even the financial markets are heading in the right direction. $100 trillion of assets under management are now committed to net zero by the middle of the century. All good. 2,000 companies as well. 8,000 cities. But the plain fact of the matter is we need a path to get there. We need a path to 2030 and then 2040. We don't yet have that discipline.
So let's talk about that path. You just co-authored a report that found we are well off track when it comes to public and private finance for climate change. You say that needs to increase 13 times faster. How do we do that?
Governments need to step up. They haven't yet. On the private side, we're actually doing better than we thought. As I mentioned, $100 trillion under assets. Even in the United States, which has not been a leader in this, most commercial banks now have signed up to a move to their overall portfolio would be net zero emissions by the middle of the century. That's a very important first step. And now they need to sign up to what are called science-based targets, which say, every year we're going to be transparent about what we're lending for and how much carbon emissions are embedded in that. And they need to be really transparent. They need to say where they're going to be by 2030.
By some measures, climate philanthropy now rivals the World Bank's climate financing. Should philanthropic organizations have that much power to shape the future of the planet and more than democratic institutions?
Oh, I wish everybody had the power to influence the world for good. My goodness me. I think it's wonderful. And I say this as someone who comes originally from Europe to see the way that American affluent people give back and philanthropies. And the fact that they're now giving not only to, well-endowed universities, but they are giving to climate as well. And that climate includes working in other countries. I mean, I'm really proud to be working for the Bezos Earth Fund, a $10 billion fund. And we're going to be going to Glasgow, making commitments to difficult but very important challenges, such as the Congo Basin, protecting those forests there, the Andean region, and so on. Looking at the energy transition in East Asia, but then also in Africa, bringing power, but also here in the United States, doing some remarkable things, helping the Biden administration on its Justice 40% of all new investments in green technologies to benefit those who have been left out before. So, no, it's a wonderful thing.
We're still in a once-in-a-lifetime or once-in-a-generation pandemic. What are the learnings from COVID-19 about climate change? What should we be taking away from this?
Well, I think the number one thing is that we are all vulnerable. Most of us, including myself, really believed that we weren't going to suffer such a thing. We really believed that our governments were going to look after us. We're going to protect us. We're going to be well organized. Well, we've actually discovered it's much more vulnerable than we thought we were. And same is true of climate change. We are deeply vulnerable. So there's now a real willingness to change. So I think there are some very positive things to come out of this. A willingness to change, a recognition that we can change quicker than we thought. Look at us. We're all working in homes still, and we're being just as effective. We can adjust, and that's a very good thing. But my goodness me, we've spent $13 trillion on ourselves as rich countries, rebooting our own economies. How wonderful it'd be if we could be supportive of less developing countries who need more help now than ever, partly because of the coronavirus, but also because of climate challenges.
Oil executives are in Washington at this very moment facing questions about industry campaigns to thwart climate action. I'm curious if you ever look at the industry's successful record of steering politicians and steering the public and think, what are they doing right rhetorically that environmentalists are not?
We need to put people at the center of our argument. We need to say, look, there was an economics of the last century. There was an economy of the last century. There's a new economy now, an economy that says, no, there's not a trade-off. If you want a healthy economy, if you want more jobs, if you want efficiency, if you want new technologies, you don't resist climate action, you accelerate climate action because that gives you more efficiency. It drives new technologies. It reduces risk and it reshapes expectations towards a future that is much, much better for you and your children and your grandchildren. We haven't done a very good job on that, quite frankly. The amazing thing is that now the economics profession, which used to always say, no, there's a trade-off here, now recognizes that there is only one way towards a healthier economy, and that is a low carbon and climate resilient economy, which, by the way, will also be more inclusive and equal.
Now that you're at the helm of the Bezos Earth Fund, how and where will you put that $10 billion to work?
Well, look, this is what we all call the decisive decade, isn't it? I mean, our recent IPCC scientific report showed that actually in the next 10 years, we will get up to enough carbon and greenhouse gases that will bring us over the 1.5 degree limit, where it starts getting really dangerous. So this is the decade. We've got to basically pivot this decade. That means we've got to have some revolutions which are very exciting. What we're doing is we're looking at the 40 to 50 revolutions that are required. We're asking which 10 should we be in and how should we engage in them so that change becomes irresistible and unstoppable, and we cross that tipping point. So that's the job of philanthropy. That's the way we're going about it. And we're starting with some pretty exciting things.
How much is Jeff Bezos involved in the day-to-day operations of the Bezos Earth Fund? How often do you talk to him?
Regularly, yes. He's very interested indeed. And it's very exciting having conversations with him.
And what are your conversations with Jeff focused on? I mean, I'm curious how he's approaching this perhaps differently than others you've worked with, other institutions you've worked for.
Well, obviously, if you are as successful as Jeff and many other leading industrialists and entrepreneurs, you're dealing with somebody that is deeply intelligent and deeply analytical and deeply passionate about what he's doing, and it's extremely exciting.
And is 2030 still the target date for the distribution of that $10 billion, or is that just an initial sum and the fund could go on after a decade?
The intention that Jeff has is that we will disperse these funds in this decisive decade, and there are some wonderful opportunities to do so. I mean, this is a time not to be wringing one's hands in despair, but rather to be saying, my goodness me, we need to leverage these funds. I mean, $10 billion is a lot of money, but at the same time, the needs are totally vast. So every single dollar that is dispersed needs not only to earn its way on its own particular project or own particular, results framework, if you like. It needs to leverage other change. And the whole point is to get a kind of upward spiral of hope, what we call an ambition loop, where you get the private sector, the government sector, the civil society, basically egging each other on, encouraging each other to go the next step. And that's exactly what we need in Glasgow next week.
Now, Jeff has $190 billion, and yes, $10 billion is a lot of money. The planet thanks him for his generosity. But is that enough if this next decade is so critical?
No, I think it's totally remarkable that someone should give away this amount of money, and I think we should use it with great stewardship, and we just need to see. We just need to see generosity of spirit all round, quite frankly, from all of us, including our governments. And we need to really go the extra mile now because there is an opportunity to change the world. And the future can be much more exciting than this.
So can you give us any hints about where the next big investment might be or the areas of interest?
We really need to do three things. We need to protect what we still have. We need to restore what we've lost. And we need to transform food systems and the rural economy. And a month ago, we committed $1 billion for the first of those. And we're going to be starting projects in those right away. Next week, we'll be announcing equivalent programs for the other two, restoration and food system transformation. That's on the nature side. Now, when it comes to, for example, the energy side, lots and lots of people are working really well and diligently on the transformation of energy towards lower carbon and more reliable access for everybody. What's happening at the moment is it's not really all adding up. And so we're engaging with others in the question of what would it take to really sort of accelerate momentum in a big way? How could we bring everybody together? So that's another issue that we're working on right now.
Now, I'm curious how you're going to measure the success of your investments. You know, in the technology industry, there's a lot of measurements and data, and you look at the numbers quarter after quarter. How will you measure success?
Well, we certainly will, and we certainly must, because if you don't measure it, you won't treasure it, and you won't manage it. So I'll give you one example. So last year, the Bezos Earth Fund put $60 million into a satellite system that will measure land use change, not only how land use is changing, but how much carbon is embedded in that is going up in the sky and how much is coming back down. It's called the carbon flux. Now you imagine when we're able to do this and companies or countries are saying, my goodness me, look what we're doing. We're protecting all this forest, or we're planting all these trees. For every single project that we have, we will georeference and we will know exactly how many trees are being planted and how long they have lasted and how much carbon is embedded in them. And you can, if you think about this more, this could enable a carbon market. You know, there's a lot going on at the moment that we're involved in, and you may be too, on voluntary carbon markets. A lot of corporations are saying, look, we want to do the right thing. But up until now, a lot of those investments haven't been very high quality. They protected the forest for a few years, but then it's gone. Or they've planted trees, and actually they didn't last. We will be able to know, down to the sort of ton of carbon, down to the 30 meter by 30 meter resolution, we will be able to basically look at that carbon flux. So you can imagine a carbon market really taking root.
Do you see these investments offsetting, for example, Amazon's carbon footprint, the airplanes, the trucks, the vans, or is more needed here to do so?
Well, I won't talk particularly because I don't work for Amazon, so you'd have to talk to them about that. But Amazon is, along with another more than 100 companies, is committed to go net zero 10 years early.
What do you think philanthropy's biggest impact will be in the next 30 years?
I think philanthropy can move quickly, can take risks that it's difficult for bigger bureaucracies to take, and it can identify those opportunities. You know, the reason that we're not crossing tipping points that we need to cross is a whole range of issues. And what we can do is really look for those blockers, and we can go and engage quickly in an unselfish, team-orientated way, but with real force.
In your prior role at the World Resources Institute, you would gather experts from around the world at the end of the year and ask them what stories you should be watching. What stories should we be watching in 2022?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Whether or not the decisions that were made and announced in Glasgow are being implemented, it is very tempting. When one goes to Glasgow, there's going to be nearly 30,000 people there. You've got over 100 heads of state. You've got some of the most powerful CEOs in the world that will be there to make, grandiose statements and commitments. And what we need to do is say, okay, it's now January the 1st, 2022. Okay, where are we on this? We need to monitor and monitor and monitor and be accountable. So the story, I think, the first story is, are we actually doing what we promised to do? And then there are many subsidiary stories. What about what we haven't yet promised to do? What about those technologies for cement and steel? What about those commitments for ocean liners? What about airline fuel, which is the next one? What about the fact that actually animals are emitting methane, which is causing a huge issue? We now have new feedstocks, but we need to subsidize them. There's a whole range of technological issues that are very, very exciting. And then into 2022, we have the Biodiversity Convention meeting, which is a once in a 10-year thing where we set new goals for the decade. And that's where we want all the countries to commit to what's called 30 by 30. 30% of all the land and all the sea to be protected by 2030. That's what we allocated the $1 billion for, and another 8 philanthropies allocated another $4 billion. So there's $5 billion from philanthropies for that. And in Glasgow, we're going to do some preparatory meetings for that. And then leading on to the biodiversity meeting in April, which will be in Kunming in China. And China, of course, has an incredibly important role to play because China imports so much, and it's those importations of commodities that lead to some of the destruction that's happening. And so we're working with them as well.